My daughter walked straight toward me in the middle of her own engagement party. And I knew something was wrong before she even spoke. The music was playing. Guests were laughing under the string lights in my backyard. Everyone was celebrating. But my daughter Lily wasn't smiling the way a bride-to-be usually does. She grabbed my wrist gently and whispered something that made my heart sink. "Mom, he came to me about the trust." Then she walked back to her fiancé like nothing had happened. My name is Margaret Lawson. I'm 61 years old, a widow, and for the past 30 years, I've run a small property management business my late husband and I built together. Most people see me as calm, practical, hard to shake. But in that moment, standing there with a glass of champagne in my hand, I suddenly felt like the ground under my feet had shifted. Because my daughter was not the kind of woman who panicked. If Lily said something like that, she had already seen something she couldn't ignore. The engagement party was supposed to be perfect. It was early autumn, and the backyard of our lakeside house in Washington had been decorated for weeks. White lights hung from the trees. Long wooden tables were covered in flowers Lily had chosen herself. Nearly 70 guests had come to celebrate. At the center of the crowd stood Lily's fiancé, Daniel Hart, tall, handsome, confident, the kind of man everyone immediately liked. My friends adored him. My sister called him the perfect gentleman. Even Lily's best friend Emma once told me she thought Lily had finally found the one. Daniel was a financial consultant who worked with wealthy clients managing investments and estate plans. At least that's what he said. He spoke politely. He listened carefully. He always knew exactly the right thing to say. But now Lily had whispered something about the trust. And suddenly my instincts were awake. I spent 30 years negotiating property deals with people who smiled while hiding their real intentions. You learn something in that business. Sometimes a person's charm isn't warmth. Sometimes it's strategy. That night I started watching Daniel more carefully. He stood with one arm around Lily while speaking to guests. His smile was flawless, but his eyes kept moving, scanning, observing, like he was measuring the room instead of enjoying it. I didn't react. Experience had taught me something else too. Never show concern until you understand the situation. The party continued for another hour. I laughed when people expected me to laugh. I thanked guests for coming. I even spoke to Daniel about property values near the lake. He was charming as always. But once Lily had spoken those words, every sentence he said sounded slightly different. Later that night, after the last guest left, Lily came into the kitchen while I was washing glasses. She closed the door quietly behind her. "Mom," she said softly. I turned around. "What happened?" I asked. Lily sat at the kitchen table and took a deep breath. 3 nights earlier, she had been working late at Daniel's apartment. Her laptop battery died, so she opened his computer to check something quickly. A spreadsheet was already open. At the top of the document were the words, "Lily Lawson, Family Asset Estimate." Lily recognized the number immediately, because it was very close to the value of everything her father and I had built. Our lake house, our rental properties, our investments. Daniel walked into the room before she could read more. So she closed the laptop. And for 3 days she tried, convincing herself there had to be an innocent explanation. But the feeling never went away. That's why she pulled me aside during the party. I listened quietly. Then I asked one question. "Do you trust him?" Lily didn't answer right away. Finally, she said something that told me everything I needed to know. I thought I did. That night, I went to my study and made one phone call to a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Rebecca Shaw, private investigator, very good at finding the truth about people. When she answered the phone, I said only one thing. Rebecca, I need a background check. 3 days later, she called me back, and the first sentence she said changed everything. The man your daughter is about to marry isn't who he says he is. Rebecca Shaw had always been good at finding the truth about people. 20 years earlier, she worked in corporate investigations, uncovering financial fraud for some very powerful companies. Now she worked privately, quietly, and when Rebecca said something didn't look right, it usually meant trouble. 3 days after I hired her, my phone rang at 7:30 in the morning. Her voice was calm, but serious. Margaret, she said, the man your daughter is engaged to isn't Daniel Hart. For a moment, I didn't say anything. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Who is he? There was a pause on the line. His real name appears to be Adrian Cole. Rebecca explained that the identity Daniel Hart had only existed for about 4 years. Before that, the same man had lived in another state under a completely different name. And the pattern she found was disturbing. Every few years, new city, new job, new relationship, and always with a woman connected to money. 7 years earlier, Adrian had been involved with a woman named Patricia Bennett in Arizona. Patricia's mother owned several apartment complexes. Within 18 months of their engagement, Patricia's bank accounts had been quietly drained through a series of complicated transfers. The case was never publicly reported. Patricia's family handled the matter privately to avoid scandal. But Adrian disappeared immediately afterward. A year later, he appeared again. Different state, different name, different woman. And now, my daughter, Rebecca, had also found something else. A woman named Clara Whitman. Clara had worked for years as a legal assistant in estate planning offices, which meant she understood family trusts, inheritance structures, and financial protections better than most people. According to Rebecca's findings, Clara and Adrian had been in contact for years. Emails, encrypted messages, travel records placing them in the same cities. It didn't take much imagination to see the pattern. Clara would research wealthy families. Adrian would enter their lives. And sooner or later, money would disappear. Rebecca's final sentence that morning made my stomach tighten. Margaret, your daughter isn't his first target. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. As a mother, there is nothing more terrifying than realizing someone is trying to harm your child. But fear wasn't what I felt most in that moment. It was something colder. Determination. That afternoon, Lily came to my house. She could see immediately that something had changed. Mom, she said carefully, what did you find? I told her everything Rebecca had discovered. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, Lily leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to come to me after a nightmare. But then something shifted in her expression. She straightened up and asked a question I hadn't expected. So, what do we do now? I studied my daughter for a moment. Then I said something that surprised even me. We let him think everything is normal. Lily frowned. You want me to pretend? Yes. Because men like Adrian Cole only make mistakes when they believe they've already won. The wedding was only 10 days away. And if Adrian thought his plan was working, he would show us exactly what he intended to do. Lily nodded slowly. I can do that. For the next week she acted like nothing had changed. She laughed with him, planned wedding details, even went to dinner with his friends. But behind the scenes, Rebecca was still investigating. And 6 days before the wedding, she discovered something that made everything clear. Clara Whitman had booked a hotel room in the same city where the rehearsal dinner would take place. The reservation was under a different name, but Rebecca had already seen enough aliases to recognize the pattern. Clara wasn't just visiting. She was coming to finish the job. That night Lily and I sat together in the living room. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally Lily looked at me and said quietly, Mom, do you think he really cares about me at all? It was the hardest question a mother could hear. But I answered honestly, no. Then I placed my hand over hers. But he's about to learn something important. Lily raised an eyebrow. What's that? I allowed myself a small smile. That the women in this family are not easy to fool. And 2 nights later, at the rehearsal dinner, Adrian Cole's perfect plan began to fall apart.